Hello, listeners. Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network, and I want to take just a quick moment to tell you about another show on our podcast network that I think you'll love. Mission Admissions cuts through the noise in college admissions and recruitment. Host Jeremy Tiers brings a fresh perspective, packing each episode with straight talk advice, tips, and strategies from a mix of pros inside and outside higher ed. One of the things I love most about the show is how Jeremy often brings voices from outside the industry to share perspectives and practices that can be applied to the work that marketers and enrollment professionals like you do every day. You can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search Mission Admissions wherever you get your podcasts.
That was like the most common question was like, I'm a super small team or I'm a one-person team. We don't have resources. What should we do?
Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed Social Media Manager, a podcast that addresses the do's, don'ts, and dynamics of the digital ecosystem specific to higher education. I'm your host, Li Fowler. Join me every other week for discussions with some of the best minds in higher education social media management and marketing. Confessions of a Higher Ed Social Media Manager is a part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Hello, friends. I'm really excited to get into a conversation with Jacob Shipley. Now, Jacob serves as the head of social at Benzinga and is building Social Studies, a community for social media pros. And I recently learned that Jacob and I are both graduates of the University of Missouri-Columbia School of Journalism. So, yay, go Mizzou Mafia. Jacob, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you so much. I am, super excited to be here. MIZ.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, Jacob, can you tell us a little bit about what social studies is and how you got into social media professionally?
I mean, getting into social media professionally was kind of by accident. I went to, like I said, went to Mizzou and then worked at the university for a while after graduating, doing video production was kind of my background. So doing like promotional, like marketing videos I was working for the ag school and that was a blast. I loved it. My wife and I knew we just didn't want to stay in Columbia. We loved Columbia, but we had just gotten married and we just wanted to go somewhere new, and we were,
I get
just
it.
wanted to explore. So
Of
we
course,
applied
yeah.
for jobs all over the place. And then the one that stuck that I ended up accepting was social media specialist at YouVersion, which is the Bible app. So when the App Store actually launched back in like '08, YouVersion was one of the apps in the App Store. And so doing some really innovative stuff, and it was a really, really cool team to be a part of. And so that was kind of accidentally stumbled into social media that route. And then social studies is just, over the course of time, just kind of built an audience of other social media managers and just trying to build a place where social media pros can just hang out, learn from each other, host events from people you actually want to hear from, and just have, meaningful conversations in a safe spot where you can talk openly and transparently.
Amazing. We'll have to share the link to that
Totally.
as well. So, you recently posted about a framework that you have for a minimal viable social media strategy for one-person teams that caught my attention. Now, what made you even decide to create a framework of that nature?
I think I started growing an email list and just kind of like, I just called it my Wednesday musings of I would just like write whatever I was thinking about as far as social media. And then I always say like, I answer every email. So ask me any questions and I probably won't know the answer, but at least we can kind of bounce our ideas around. And that was like the most common question was like, I'm a super small team, or I'm a one-person team. We don't have resources. What should we do? And so started talking to other people and just like trying to get advice from other one-person social media teams, and just kind of put this, how I was thinking about it and how a lot of other people were thinking about it, and just kind of distilled my thoughts into, I don't know, 4 or 5 points, or, a process to just kind of think about it, of how to approach it if resources are a limitation.
Yeah, sadly, one-person teams are still very common. Um, although, yeah, so it's not ideal, but they do exist, which is why we're having this conversation. So let's get into it. Where do we start?
When I'm thinking about social media, I'm thinking in terms of like buckets of different styles, and like, Nike and Apple, they can play in every bucket, right? Because, and not just those companies, but big brands that have a really well established social team can play in a lot of buckets. But if you're just starting out, I would think, what type of content do we want to create? And so if you're a B2B SaaS company, maybe it's text-based content, or like I'm thinking like LinkedIn, Twitter, like thought leadership type content. If you're a D2C company targeting Gen Z, well, then you probably need to be in the short form video game. You need to be thinking about like, how is that audience consuming that content? So really it starts with like, where's your audience hanging out? How do they want to consume content? And then, so I start there, picking a format of what kind of content do you want to create. If your CEO has been doing a podcast for 10 years and you have a wealth of, video content, like, okay, that's a great place to start. So most people, when they hear that, their mind immediately goes to, this is probably the right fit for my brand. They can kind of pick one of those buckets to kind of start with.
Okay. So when you're thinking that through, is it content that you have, or is it content that your audience prefers to consume, or is it a little bit of both?
That's a really good distinction. I think when I was thinking about it, in an ideal world, it would be both. But you're right. A lot of brands maybe have created a lot of content, and maybe it wasn't formatted in a way the audience. So I think, yeah, if you have to pick one, it's definitely, you want to go the route of, how does your audience want to consume content, and how can you position it in that way? Because at the end of the day, like, everybody has an opinion about your content. The only opinion that matters is the audience. And so how do they want to see this? So yeah, definitely, that's a really good distinction. Yeah, I would definitely go the route of, um, ideally, if you have both, that's amazing. But yeah, definitely, how does your audience consume content? Where are they hanging out? What format are they most likely to consume?
Yeah, I always have to, remind people it's our content is not for us, it's for our
Right.
audience, right? So you have like so what's next in your framework? I feel like there's like 4 steps, is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And so it's the next step would be like creating a content plan. So you've got this bucket, you're thinking, okay, like, I'm gonna do thought-based leadership, text-based content, or I'm gonna do short form video, TikTok style. This is the kind of content I want to produce. And then, so coming up with a plan of how are we going to, now we kind of know what bucket we want to create for. How do we get to the point where we are actually moving content out? And I think another important distinction is, your audience really doesn't care how much time you spend on the content. They don't care how much money you spend on the content. We're both Mizzou J School grads, but they don't care if it's AP style. They don't care about any of that. They only
It's
care
true.
about, does it make their life better in the moment they're consuming the content. So like you said it great, the content's not for us, it's for our audience. And then, so there are some like kind of process you can follow. So for text-based content, write a thought down that you think would sound natural to your brand, and then rewrite it 7 different ways and schedule that out, one a week for 7 weeks. And then, because I think we get so caught up on, our audience is going to get tired of us saying the same thing over and over. But when we're tired of saying something, our audience is probably just starting to hear it, just
Yeah.
because of the way organic social works. Like, such a small percentage of your audience is going to see any given message at any given time. And if the content's actually valuable, like if we really are creating content that the audience, that adds value to their life, they're not going to care if they're getting, value in different ways. If it's the same, I hope that makes sense. You can kind of, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, just kind of change that up. And then for, video based content, if that's kind of the route, what's the process you're going to put in place to create that content? So is it on Mondays we record a 2-hour podcast that we pull short form clips from, or is it on Fridays, we go around the office filming, TikTok style interview content. What is it? Put on paper a plan. This is how we're going to get content created. And I think people always say, like, well, how much should I post? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but my answer is always as much as you possibly can sustainably. So you don't want to come out of the gate and post 8 times a day and then fall off the wagon in 2 weeks. If you can only post once a week, well, that's not ideal, but if you can sustain that over the long term, that's better than coming out hot and then dying down. So just building a plan to where you can have a system where content's coming out, you have a source of where that's being created, how it's being processed, and how it's going out the door. The really boring stuff. This isn't like sexy social media, but it's like,
No.
who's going to create it? Who's going to film it? Who's going to edit it? Who's going to post it?
I always say that this is the management and the process is what separates the users from the pros from the users, because we have a system for all of this. It's not
Totally.
just we're just posting on a whim. But I agree. I agree with what you said about post how much you can, how often you can, and you have to have some realistic, really honest conversations with yourself about what you can sustain.
Totally.
But it did sound like you said, if you are a one-person team, do the most you can with the content you create. So it sounded like you were just like, get the most use out of it, post it. Don't just post it once and be done with it. Post it multiple times and in different ways. Is that, am I interpreting
Totally.
that right?
Yeah. I think, I had a TikTok video for a while when I had my second daughter. I was posting just some like dad life videos, and I had one that got like 300 views, and I thought it was a good post, and I was like, I feel like it's better than 300 views. And so I posted it again, and it got 3.6 million views the second time around. And so it's just like the power of repurposing content is like, the algorithm's pretty good, but sometimes, it gets it wrong and you need to throw it back in the rotation. And I'm constantly doing that with, my personal account and brand accounts. Is every 90 days, if there's a timeless piece of content that really outperformed the average, there's no reason you can't throw it back in the rotation. And Justin Welsh writes a lot on LinkedIn. He's kind of one of the OG like LinkedIn creators. He talks a lot about that, of like, have a point you're trying to say, write it 7 different ways, one through telling a story, one through a contrarian take, one, say the same thing a lot of different ways, and then you can post that out. So yeah, you're creating a lot of pieces of content, but especially if you're a one-person team, you want to make it as easy on yourself as possible, because trying to do everything is a recipe for burnout. And that's, I think, where we go back to that first bucket of you're picking one type of content. And the next point kind of leads into that of how you decide where to post, but don't feel like you need to make native Twitter content, native TikTok content, native YouTube content, native Instagram content. That's going to be a recipe for burnout. You want to pick, a process that is sustainable in the long run.
Hey, it's Mallory. Exciting news! I'm hosting the Engage Summit in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Together, we'll dive into the mind of the modern student, what fires them up, how they interact, and what they expect in today's digital age, and how tools like AI help put them in the driver's seat of their education. We have some terrific speakers, including our closing keynote, New York Times bestselling author Jeff Selingo. Sessions will dig into practical ideas and innovative strategies to get your team more student-centered and ready to adopt AI. And many of your favorite Enrollify hosts are presenting too, like Jamie Hunt, Jenny Li Fowler, and Brian Gross. Use the discount code Enrollify50 for an extra $50 off your registration. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get to your next sort of step in the framework, I want to go back to that. You said you posted something. It got 300. You posted a TikTok. It had 300 some views. Then you posted the same thing the exact same way again.
Exact same way.
And it got 3.6 million views, you said.
Yeah.
Whoa, there's a huge lesson in that. So because you knew as a professional, you were like, I think this is better than that. And you just posted it again.
Yeah.
What did you do different?
I mean, nothing.
Is
I get it
there?
wrong all the time, though. I think there's so many times, like social pros in general. There's kind of like the meme is like you spend 60 minutes on a post that flops, and then 30 seconds on a post that goes viral. So like sometimes it's hard to tell what's going to go viral. But yeah, you have like an inkling of like this seems to have the right ingredients to do well. And this was in 2021, and so yeah, TikTok was kind of the wild wild west. I mean, it still is to some extent, but yeah, I mean, sometimes the initial group of people they showed it to might have not been the right audience. Yeah. So yeah, repurposing content totally underrated, and definitely like in the long run, that minimizes the amount of work of creating new content. If you have winners you can pull from when creative droughts happen, when schedules get crazy, you have a bank of content you can pull from, so you're not killing yourself trying to play catch up.
Wow, that's that is definitely new to me, and I'm definitely going to try that. It's not even A/B testing a piece of content. You didn't change it. You just
No.
posted it
Yeah.
again and just watched how it did. That's
Yeah.
great. I think that there's a huge lesson in that. But okay, so then we'll go to like sort of the next the
Yeah.
found
So
yeah.
so step one was like picking a bucket. Step two was like, okay, put pen on paper and like we have a plan. Step three is I call it like pick your ride or die. So like what's your one platform that you're going to go all in on? And this is where if your bucket is short form video content, you have a plan to create it. We know that short form video can be posted across Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. There are a lot of places you can put it on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can put it everywhere, but you can only really optimize for one platform. And people that live and breathe social know like TikTok content, it just feels different than Instagram content. And not to say TikTok content won't do well on Instagram, it definitely can and it does, but optimize for where is my audience, how can I make content that is made for this specific algorithm? Um, and this is the platform, B2B SaaS company, you're probably on LinkedIn, maybe Twitter, D2C, Gen Z brand, you're probably going to be on TikTok. Like, so pick a platform that is your most important. And then step four is cross pollinate. So like you made TikTok specific content, but it's foolish not to just go ahead and post it on Instagram, YouTube. Like, why not just try it? And then you can even go a step further if you wanted to pull, like, if it applies, you can pull a transcript and then take the highlights and use it as text for Twitter and LinkedIn. So you can do a lot of different things. You're optimizing for one, and then you're finding ways to really, really easily cross post and pull pieces of those content apart to where you can put it on other channels. Just so, is it going to get the best results it possibly can? Well, no, probably not, but it's way better than just doing nothing. And so that's the last step, was that cross pollinate, figure out how can we take our content and make it work as hard as possible for us, especially if we're a one person team that doesn't have a writer, a designer, an editor. How can we just do that ourselves to put it in as many places as possible?
Yeah, I love the term that you're using with that cross-pollination of content, but essentially focus on one, like really make one platform like your star platform, and
Totally.
then if it works on others, go ahead and post. I really like that idea. But what if some social media managers get pressure about adding a new channel, being in the new trendy, shiny new channel, like what do
Totally.
you recommend that they do?
There are a couple ways to go about it. I mean, like one, like I think like setting expectations is like, okay, like if we do this, this will take this much time. What am I currently doing? You want to take off my plate to put this on my plate, and those are kind of hard conversations. But then, if it's like, hey, we really need to do this, do you have existing content? Are if it's a new short form video platform, are you creating short form video content somewhere else? Um, and just asking questions, is our audience hanging out here? Do we have reason to
Hmm.
believe
Hmm.
our audience is here? Because if your audience isn't there and you can prove that, or prove that they are, well, then that's really all that matters. But then yeah, if you have content that you can cross pollinate and use, at least to like proof of concept of where it's not that much work to post to one more platform, see if it gets traction, see is our audience hanging out there. If they are, great, what does the long-term strategy look like? But there's no harm in testing and learning and kind of figuring that apart as you go.
Yeah, I agree. I just think that there are a series of questions you should ask yourself and have, that conversation with your supervisor to see if it's really worth the time, right? If your audience isn't there just because you think they are, doesn't mean they are, right?
Yeah,
So I
totally.
agree. Yeah, I
And
agree.
it's you can kind of go either way. Like I was starting to say like, well, what are your competitors doing? And that
Hmm.
can go either way because like if your competitors are hanging out there, well, it's like, well, then you should probably hang out there. But if your competitors aren't hanging out there, well, then maybe we really should be on there because there's we're not competing with. So yeah, I think you're right. It's just a lot of questions of just trying to like learn, and that's one of the funnest things about working in social, especially like I wasn't in higher ed social media, but I was in higher ed marketing for a while. Of like that demographic is obviously technology's changing, interests are changing, and it's fun. It's new. There's always something different, and it's really exciting. And I think that's part of what makes it so special.
Yeah. But, I know you said if your competitors aren't there or are there, maybe you should be. But sometimes I think if they are and they're not getting any traction or
Totally.
engagement, that's probably telling too. It's
Yeah.
probably saying, your audience isn't there or isn't there right now. So
Yeah,
don't
and that's
worry
a
too
great
much about
distinction.
it.
Yeah, if your audience is there and they're growing, they went from 0 to 100,000 followers in a week. Well, yeah, I'd perk up and pay
There's an
attention. But
opportunity.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
if they have 14 followers, then it's like okay, like we probably are okay. So yeah, that's a great point for sure.
So what is next on our list of having a viable social media strategy for one person teams?
Yeah, so that cross pollinate piece was the last piece. I think if
Okay.
to put a button on it, like it's always changing, and your audience is never staying the same. And so I think the data analytics reporting, seeing what is working, what is not working, and then is this plan that we have still, we call it the minimum viable social strategy. Is it still viable? Is it still working well, or do we need to investigate? Is what's the ROI look like? We add another person, so we're not a one-person social media team now, or do we need to transition platforms? Are we seeing a drop off? Are we seeing a spike? So I think it's just it's a continual cycle of evaluating, learning, and then implementing what the data is telling us.
Totally. I think that one thing as social media managers, we're constantly adding to our plates, but I think it's just as important to remove things from our plates. So
Hmm.
do you feel the same way, or like how do you feel about maybe like stopping to post in platforms if they're not working?
Totally, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's huge. If and again, it's like goes back to asking questions like how much time are we spending, how many man hours, how much money, what are the resources going in, and what are the resources coming out. And then maybe the more important question is if we were to pick up all those resources and put them into another bucket, what would come out of that? Would the return be greater there? So yeah, I think that's, like I said, as our audience changes, like I don't know many brands that are still really active on MySpace, right? Like, or that's a thing. Like
Fair.
you have to make a call of different people left at different times. But yeah, I totally agree. I think if it's not as social media practitioners, like I think sometimes we, or at least I, get caught up in the artistic aspect of it, of you're
Mhm.
growing an audience and it's fun and it's exciting. But at the end of the day, like we work for institutions that have an end goal that usually involves some form of money changing hands. And if we're not producing a positive ROI, then it begs the question of what is the long term plan. So yeah, totally agree. I think sometimes that means taking a step back and then figuring out where we're going to put that effort, where it can work harder for us.
No, I know we hadn't discussed this question, but I'm just gonna kind of pop it on you.
Sure.
So for our friends that are one person teams, how do we, how do we suggest, or how do they move away from that and maybe convince their supervisors or convince their I don't know, about like leadership to invest more like resources into the team? Like how do we move in that direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I first got into social at YouVersion, like I said, YouVersion was one of the first apps in the App Store when it launched. And so that was a very innovative, exciting organization to be a part of. They were thinking very forward and were willing to take a lot of risks and put a lot of energy and effort into things to reach people and to try new things. And I've also worked on, a Fortune 100 company where it's ROI, 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 which isn't a bad thing. That's just the way it is. And so in those types of environments where it's every dollar is counted, it's proving out ROI and getting really good at reporting, which isn't fun or exciting, but it's the reality of, I think that's one of the things that helps elevate people from individual contributors to team leaders in the social media space is how can you communicate effectively about what you're doing. It's one skill to be able to grow an audience and an engaged community, and another skill to be able to explain that, to be able to lead people to do that, to be able to pitch that and explain the ROI of what you're doing and make a case that if we had X, we could do Y and the business impact would be Z. And, like I said, that's probably not why we get into a career in social media, but that's just the reality of the situation of certain organizations, and obviously there's a huge spectrum, but a lot of organizations fall on that side to where that's just the reality of how we have to approach it. It is a, data-driven process.
That's a great advice. I agree. I think that if you should lead with data and prove the need for more resources by using data, and hopefully that works.
Totally, yeah.
So Jacob, So Jacob, I always end with this question, but what is your confession?
Everything I say is just somebody else's quote. I was having a conversation with my wife the other day, and she said, "I've noticed that you really you quote other people a lot." I was like, I think I do. And so I started kind of keeping track. I was like, about 95% of what I say is I'm quoting other people. So nobody really knows what they're doing. We're all just kind of figuring it out as we go.
I agree with that. But I also like to think you're maybe curating some of the best ideas.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And helping to share them. Yeah.
It's not copyright. It's curation.
Yes, I like it. Can you tell us where we can find you online and where we can find social studies?
Yeah, totally. So where I hang out the most is LinkedIn. That's where I've kind of planted my flag of I'm going to hang out here and write about my thoughts. And then, it's howtosocialmedia.com /social studies is it's an application-based community. We really wanted to have, we're much more concerned about it being a vetted experience to where you feel like you're part of a community of true experts that really know what they're doing, so you can feel good about the advice you're getting and the people you're hearing from. And so, if you're interested in that, we'd love to have you. And then the newsletter is also called Social Studies.
Perfect. We'll also share that on the landing page of the website. So, Jacob, thank you so much for your insights and your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a blast.
Confessions of a Higher Ed Social Media Manager is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Jamie Hunt, Allison Tercio, Mallory Wilsey, and so many others of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.